Hello, good morning. I do apologize for coming at you a little bit later this morning. I was detained doing other stuff, but that's the cool thing about YouTube. Man, is my face red? It's my skin is so sensitive when I shave. I mean, look at this. It's what I turn red. I look like, but anyway, yes. And so today we're going to continue, we're going to finish off this unit on the Renaissance. I sent you I sent you on Canvas. I sent you, yes, on Canvas the Tom Ritchie's discussion of the Northern Renaissance and the differences between the Northern Renaissance and the High Renaissance. Tom Ritchie and I seem to be at disagreements. Talking about, now, if you look at what I said on Canvas, talked about how the High Renaissance was more religious and things were more, the themes were more elevated. And then Tom Ritchie comes along and says, oh, the High Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, was more secular. Well, let's think about that for a minute. Tom, what are the greatest works of the Italian Renaissance? Well, let's see. There is Michelangelo's David. That's not secular. I mean, that's David. That's the Bible's David. There's Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. That seems to be about Christ, Tom. And so, yeah, and then there's, of course, Raphael's The School of Athens, which half of those characters there represent people from the Old Testament. There is Michelangelo's Moses and Moses, yeah. But now let's go transfer over to the Northern Renaissance. What are the greatest works of the Northern Renaissance? The greatest works of the Northern Renaissance was The Money Changer and His Wife, was the marriage of Giovanni Arnolfini and whatever that woman's name was. That's secular. There's genre type art, The Hunter's Return. That's genre art. But I think we did agree upon the fact that the Northern Renaissance does focus on more social themes. Yes, Christian humanism. In other words, combining the ideas of Christianity with being a citizen of the world. You see, and so but Tom and I do disagree about that. But I think it's more of a disagreement of the type of terms that we use. Anyway. Now, today, hopefully, you remember you have that one quiz, a 10-minute time writing assignment, which is actually as much an experiment for you as it is for me. I hope next week to give you more of a reel, because, guys, we got to be ready to write this test in 45 minutes. And I've been watching Facebook, and a lot of the teachers who have done this with their students, given them the 45 minutes, the first thing all the students are crying about is, I don't have time to create a 4-paragraph piece of paper that includes references to 5 documents and 10 points. And so we got to do it because, the standard has been set, and that's what we're going to be doing. But yes, we start today with doing that little 10-minute assignment, which, you write a paragraph in 10 minutes, given that question. At the end of the day, I'll look at those and I'll try to make sure I get them to you this weekend. Also, tomorrow, remember, you have your 100-point, 55-minute review quiz. 100 points, yeah, and it's once again, it's time. It's a time element. Okay, let's finish this unit, shall we? Renaissance education on Roman numeral 14. If you have your study guide out, Renaissance education was in many ways like the old classical Greek idea of an educated man. Some women did receive training, but by and large, no. The idea of Renaissance education was not to create scholars, but to turn out practical citizens. You say, what does that mean? People who could do everything well, who were prepared to meet the challenges of their modern world. Their education was to be intellectual, meaning be able to read, physical, meaning, fencing was a part of, dueling was a part of the education of the Renaissance man. Practical, counting, accounting, and moral. A Renaissance man was a person who could do lots of things well. The prototypical idea of what a Renaissance man was supposed to be was Leonardo da Vinci. And Leonardo da Vinci was, what could he do? Well, he could paint a little bit. I'm being funny. But he also got into inventions. He was a sculptor of note. I mean, if you remember the picture of the Da Vinci horse, he sculpted that thing out of clay. But that thing, was like 30 feet tall. I mean, that's some skill. And it was perfectly proportional. Anyway, before the French turned it into a pile of dust. History was written and taught from a more secular point of view versus in contrast with the viewpoint of the Age of Faith. Francesco Guicciardini was a Renaissance historian. Yeah. Roman numeral 15. As we all know, and this is the kind of thing that they could use as a possible topic for this upcoming exam. The legacy of the printing press. How did it change society over the years? How did the print industry change? The greatest invention of the last 1,000 years is the printing press, and there's nobody else comes close. The printing press, once again, it made knowledge cheap. It made it to where more people could have access to knowledge. And by having access to knowledge, they could turn around and do more things and spread the Renaissance all throughout Europe. By 1500, there were more than 1,000 printing presses in Europe. And remember, the printing press was only invented in 1456, but by the year 1500, there were 1,000 of them already. And they had published almost 40,000 titles. That means 40,000 individual books. And made up between 8 and 10 million copies of books. Probably about 50% of these books were still about religion. Makes sense. Printing became one of the largest industries in Europe. Books encouraged scholarly research. People read books and wanted to know more. They also encouraged the standardization of knowledge, meaning that everyone learned the same things. How many feet are in a mile? 5,280. No matter what book you look in about how many feet are in a mile, it's going to be 5,280. Cheap printed books cause an explosion in the reading public. But now hold your horses. When it says an explosion in the reading public, still the great majority of the population of Europe, loaded up today, could not read. But a lot more than used to. Thank you, printing press. Thank you, Martin Luther, who said every man's his own priest. Of course, when one thinks of the Renaissance, one thinks mostly about works of art. What is art? Two definitions. The most technical, and they're both very simple. The technical definition for art is expression on a medium. 4 words, expression on a medium. In other words, I mean, for example, the way that I speak to you is me expressing something, and the medium is my voice. Other people do not speak the same way I do. Johnny B. Good has his own way of speaking. One day he'll come back. We'll see. Now, the second definition was, once again, in the 20th century, a reporter asked Pablo Picasso, who now is not going to be on your AP Euro exam, but a reporter once asked Pablo Picasso, the greatest artist of the 20th century, ask him, what is art? And Pablo Picasso's greatest answer, what is not? Yeah. Everything is art. So remember that Renaissance artists were supposed to be trained in the Renaissance education model. Well, I just say that, they could do several types of art. I mentioned Leonardo da Vinci a minute ago. I mean, everybody knows him as a painter, but, he also did the Da Vinci horse. That's sculpting. And artists also were trained to sketch with a pencil and other types of art as well. So yeah, you should know the greatest works of the Renaissance masters. You should know them. Michelangelo's David, Donatello's David, Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, Mona Lisa, Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things, and my friend Tom Ritchie talked about the same thing. One of the things that Renaissance artists were able to do that their predecessors in the Middle Ages couldn't do was that they solved the problem of perspective. If you look at works of art of the Middle Ages, it looks like you're looking at a cartoon, a two-dimensional cartoon. What makes Renaissance art different, the reason why they're called the Renaissance masters, is because they had mastered the technique of a third dimension, of giving a picture depth. And so, yeah, two types of perspective on your test. The one next Friday. Atmospheric perspective, whereby the artist creates the illusion of depth by making things that he wants to appear to be far away to be hazy, and the details are not as sharp. Then, of course, the other method is linear perspective. Linear perspective is when the artist uses lines in the picture, and those lines, instead of going straight, as you look in the distance, the lines tend to do this towards a vanishing point. Fresco was the most common type of art of the Renaissance, paintings of the Renaissance, which is oil painting on wet plaster, which worked in Italy because of the nice dry climate. In the northern part of Europe, not so much. Tom Ritchie didn't talk about that, did he? He didn't talk about the fact that in Northern Europe, they didn't use the fresco. They adhered more towards using oil on wood panel and oil paint on canvas. So Botticelli, the famous Primavera, which means spring, Filippo Brunelleschi. Filippo Brunelleschi created the great dome of the city of Florence, which is the symbol of the city of Florence, Il Duomo, as it's called. So the period of time from 1480 to 1520 is referred to as the High Renaissance. And so that's what people think of when people think of this. They think of the 4 Ninja Turtle artists, and they're written right there on your study guide. Michelangelo, who did David, Moses, the Pietà, and the painting of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Leonardo da Vinci, who did Madonna of the Rocks. Mona Lisa, almost started singing there. Mona Lisa, The Last Supper, and then various diagrams for proposed inventions of a helicopter, a parachute, tank weapon, a water pump, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Diagrams of the human anatomy. Donato Donatello, who, of course, sculpted his own David, except his was in bronze, and then statues commemorating the triumphs of Florence over Milan. And finally, Raphael, once again, on your test. Once again, Raphael was the guy that when these four guys were alive, and once again, they all lived at the same time. They all knew of each other. Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci knew each other and didn't like each other, but they all knew of each other. But during that time, everybody thought that Raphael was going to be the one, the star, that he was the most talented. And, Raphael created the School of Athens, which, now for what it's worth, Raphael was also the commission. He was the official painter of Pope Julius II. And there are some paintings, mosaics in the St. Peter's Cathedral, which are done by Raphael. But to be real honest, outside of the art world, most people don't know Raphael. They know Michelangelo, they know Leonardo, Raphael not so much. All right. The ability to afford art meant you had money. The ability to afford art meant you had status. Often the artists would then put themselves in their works of art and along with their benefactors, like, as a way of immortalizing them. This is done several times in art, where the artist would be painting something famous and he would put not only his own face in the work of art, but he would also put in the work of the guy who paid for the art as well. Roman numeral 17, here we go, Northern Renaissance. In the Northern Renaissance, Renaissance art took a slightly different slant and was simply referred to as the art as the Northern Renaissance. Simply stated, the Northern Renaissance focused more and more on secular or humanist subjects and less upon Christianity and the classics as themes. The most well-known of the Northern School of Art was in Flanders, which is now Belgium. In the north, the fresco was abandoned in favor of illuminated manuscripts, oil on wood, and oil on canvas. Why? It's the climate. Frescoes did not dry properly. If you've ever been in Northern Europe, it does. It rains a lot, and it just does. It's not good for drying out frescoes. Genre painting, which depicts scenes from everyday life. Not, for example, in the High Renaissance, you don't see genre paintings as much. You don't see common themes such as the marriage, the moneylender and his wife, the marriage of Giovanni Arnolfini and Giovanni Sinani, whatever her name is, the parable of the four blind. You don't see that in the High Renaissance. You see it in the Northern Renaissance. Forgive me. Should you know the great works of art? I don't think it'll come up. Jan van Eyck, Giovanni Arnolfini and his bride, Albert Dürer, The Adoration of the Magi, Devil, Death, and the Night. Music of the Renaissance was mostly attached at first to religious exercises, but as time went on, songs and ballads became more secular and humanistic. Gregorian chant is a chant where everybody sings the same note. I can't sing. I'm sorry, okay? Guillaume Dufay was a writer of Renaissance music. A Renaissance madrigal is where one group sings and the other group answers. And would that ever appear on your final exam? Highly unlikely. So in the first half of the 14th century, Europe continued to decline into a hodgepodge network of warring feudalistic states with no strong national governments emerging. But in the second half, from 1350 to 1400, England, France, and Spain, test questions. These were the first three real countries of Europe. England, France, and Spain began to establish national identities and were able to extend power and influence into expanding borders. These were called the new monarchies: England, France, and Spain. Okay. Central, Southern, and Eastern Europe remained weak, disunited, small kingdoms fighting each other, and still lived under the constant threat of invasion, especially an invasion from the Ottoman Empire, who, when we begin studying European history, the Ottoman Empire is still the bad man, not the sick man, the bad man of Europe. And everybody was afraid of them. That's going to change. Roman numeral 19. In France, the cessation of the 100 Years' War, which is also mentioned in somebody's test. The 100 Years' War, in fact, it's mentioned tomorrow. But what was the 100 Years' War about? The 100 Years' War was about when the French king died, and the English king said, hey, I'm related to him, so I think I'll be the French king, as well as the English king. And they fought for 100 years over that. And that's what it was about. All right. In France, the cessation of the 100 Years' War left France in a weakened state, but they had successfully rid the French of their English invaders. Now, in other words, for France, they had to fight England for 100 years. They were weakened, but they finally kicked the English out. Charles VII was crowned the King of France at the conclusion of the 100 Years' War. Charles raised an army using the taille as a source of revenue. Taille is a head tax. If you have a head, you get taxed. Charles also won the right to continue this levy on a yearly basis without permission of any parliamentary body, such as the three estates, which, is a terminology you need to know, because not only is it on your test, but going forward, talk about the French Revolution. If you don't know what the three estates are, you're really backing up. What are the three estates? They're the three divisions, three classes, and they're in order. Top, the clergy, about 1% of the population. Second, the nobility, about 1.5% of the population. Third, everybody else, primarily serfs and peasants. Okay. All right. Part B. Louis XI, also called Charles the Spider. I don't know why, but actually I do know why. Charles was probably his original name, but he took on the name of Louis because, once again, when kings and popes accede to their position, I didn't realize how shiny my head was, accede to their position in society, they changed their name. So anyway, Charles the Spider was threatened by his own nobility, which was not uncommon, particularly Charles the Bold, the Duke of Burgundy, and Burgundy today is a region in France. Charles tried to create his own country by combining Burgundy with, the Low Countries, which are also on your test. The Low Countries, name them. Can you, Miss Manning? Netherlands, Luxembourg. What's the other one, Mr. Lynn? Belgium. Oh, you got that. Good job. So, Charles was killed in fighting the Swiss in 1477, opening the door for Louis XI to consolidate most of what is now considered France. After the 100 Years' War, England descended into its own civil war, and a new monarchy was elected. After the English had been kicked out of France in 1453, a civil war erupted between the House of Lancaster, represented by the Red Rose, and the House of York, represented by the White Rose. This has been called the War of the Roses. In 1485, the last Yorkish king, Yorkist, that means he was from the town of York or city of York, Richard III, which inspired a Shakespearean play, Richard III. My horse, my kingdom for a horse. Yes, and he actually talked with a lisp and had a hunchback and limped. Yeah, Richard III, kind of a monster-looking person, was defeated by Henry Tudor of the House of Lancaster. Henry Tudor, this is Henry the Seventh, who will begin the Tudor dynasty. Henry revoked the nobles' right of livery and maintenance. You say, what does that mean? The right to maintain their own armies. Okay. He also utilized the Star Chamber to control rebellious nobles. Star Chamber's on your test. Yes. Star Chamber was, once again, it was a torture chamber. And, you know, what happened was, if for some reason the king decided he didn't like you, then you, in the middle of the night, be carted off to this place. It was called the Star Chamber. And chances are, if you came back from the Star Chamber, you were not quite the man you used to be. How many fingers do you really need? See what I'm saying here? All right. He also avoided war as well as avoiding taxation on his nobility. Yeah, Henry the Seventh gained favor because he didn't tax his nobility. That's going to change. All right, Roman numeral 21. In 711 AD, Spain was invaded and conquered by the Moors, Muslims from North Africa, and they stayed there until 1492. And while the rest of Europe once again was stumbling around the Dark Ages, burning witches, Spain never went through the Dark Ages. Spain was a lone beacon of Muslim art, architecture, and learning. However, after several centuries of Muslim occupation, the Spanish began the long process of what was called the Reconquista, the reconquering of Spain. Several independent kingdoms arose before the Spanish finally drove out the last of the Moors from Granada in 1492. Yeah, the same year, Columbus, yeah, I know. Two of the largest kingdoms were Aragon, ruled by Ferdinand, and Castile, ruled by Isabella. They got married and united the two largest provinces of the Iberian Peninsula and became known as Hispania, or Spain. They were known as Los Reyes Católicos, the Catholic kings. Ferdinand and Isabella reformed many of the old feudal practices and made themselves recognized as the ruling entities of the Spanish kingdom. Their army was the strongest in Europe. The Spanish army was strongest in Europe in the 15th, 16th centuries. This was aided a lot because Columbus had bumped into the New World, and the Spanish began shipping silver from North and South America mostly, to Spain, literally by the boatload, literally by the ton. And so, yeah, Spain became the most powerful country in all of Europe. However, Los Reyes Católicos, the Catholic kings, Ferdinand and Isabella, enforced almost complete control of the Roman Catholic Church. In other words, they enforced the control of the Roman Catholic Church and would allow no other religious groups to exist within its border. 150 of the 200,000 Jews living in Spain were forced to leave. Muslims were strongly urged to convert to Christianity. This is the Spanish, if you haven't put it together, this is the Spanish Inquisition. Ferdinand and Isabella said, we're going to be a Catholic country, and all you Muslims and Jews living here, you're going to convert, or you're going to light up the night. Yeah. It was called the Autos de Fe, the fires of the faithful, which meant bodies of Muslims and Jews being set on fire at night on crosses. So yeah, these conversos, in other words, these Jews and Muslims who converted to Christianity, were looked upon with great suspicion, and they became the target of the famous Spanish Inquisition. All right, Roman numeral 22. By contrast, the kingdom known as the Holy Roman Empire could never fully lock down its control of what is now Germany, Switzerland, and parts of Italy. Yeah, the Holy Roman Empire. Never holy, never Roman, nor an empire. It was an idea of the Roman Catholic Church to try and recreate Rome. It really never, ever, ever got off the ground. The Holy Roman Empire was ruled by members of the Habsburg family. It was an attempt to rule, you know. The Habsburgs ascended into power through strategic marriages. I saw that on somebody's test. I don't know where. Strategic marriages. There were two families of Habsburgs. There were the Spanish Habsburgs, who, of course, ruled Spain and the Netherlands and much of Central and South America. And then the Austrian Habsburgs, who, of course, ruled Austria and parts of Germany. Maximilian, the Holy Roman Emperor, was opposed by many of the German princes who were more interested in consolidating their own kingdom. And that is why, boys and girls, that is why, the Protestant Reformation got a footing so quickly. Roman numeral 23. In Eastern Europe, nation making went along at a much slower pace. The dominant peoples of Europe were the Slavs. Yes, of which there were three major groups. The largest group of Slavs were the Russians. The second largest, the Poles. Third largest, the Serbs. But there are lots of other smaller Slavic groups. But yes, the most dominant peoples of Eastern Europe were the Slavs. And the word Slav comes from the Roman practice of making these people into slaves. This area was also the domain of many conflicting religious groups: Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, Muslims, and various pagan groups. Poland, for a while, had the strongest army of the medieval period. In fact, Poland actually saved the city of Venice. The city of Venice. What was that? Yeah, Poland had the city of Venice. Saved the city of Venice from a Muslim conquest. I got distracted there for a minute. I'm sorry. Poland, while having a strong army, fell into disarray because of problems with infighting. The commoners were reduced to the rank of peasantry, and the nobles were able to elect the Polish king, which they never did very well, actually. Bohemia, who are Slavs, by the way, which today we call the Czechs. Bohemia was officially part of the Roman Empire, but they struggled for independence from those German rulers. Hungary was the legacy of the Magyars, M-A-G-Y-A-R, Magyars. Hungarians speak Magyar. They are not Slavic. They are not German. It's a whole different language. Hungarians are from Central Asia originally. They speak Magyar. German missionaries had converted the Hungarians to Roman Catholicism. The Hungarians, had one strong king, Matthias Corvinus, who created a kingdom very similar to the cultural level of the rest of Renaissance Europe. When he died, Hungary became a weakened state and would soon roll over under the rule of the Austrian Habsburgs. And Hungary will be, as you know, part of the Austrian Empire until 1918. Russia struggled for its independence from the invading Mongols for centuries before expelling them in the 15th century. Ivan III, called Ivan the Great, kicked out the last of the Mongols in 1480, and that made Russia into Russia. Okay, so now we have Russia in the east, we have a Poland in the east, we have a Hungary, which is going to become part of Austria. So, Roman numeral 24, the last remnants of what had once been the mighty Roman Empire was to be found on the borders of Asia. We're on 24, the borders of Asia, in what used to be a small fishing town chosen by the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 3rd century. This town was called Byzantium, before Constantine modestly changed the name to Constantinople, and the empire became known as the Byzantine Empire. So, while the Byzantine Empire, just because of where it was, the Byzantine Empire deflected potential invasions into a weakened Europe for much of the Dark Ages. It was their brother Christians in the Fourth Crusade who sacked the city of Constantinople in 1204, and the Byzantine Empire never recovered from that. The Byzantine Empire survived that sacking in a very weakened state, and for over 2 centuries staved off the Ottoman Turks who surrounded the great city from the east and the west. The Sultan Mehmed II, Mehmed II, Dr. Oz's great-great-great-grand whatever, hauled 70 full-size ships from the Black Sea into the Sea of Marmara, which is on the southern coast of Constantinople. See, I can see this in my mind. To attack Constantinople from both the Black Sea and the Aegean before it fell. defended mostly by 8,000 mercenaries, and the year was 1453. And the city of Constantinople were defended by 8,000 mercenaries. The invaders, unlike the Christians in Spain, the invaders, the Ottoman Turks, who had destroyed all of the beautiful mosques and forced Muslims to either leave or convert, the Ottomans took many of the Byzantines' more impressive works and just kept them. For example, the great Hagia Sophia Church, which was converted into a mosque. Actually, today, the Hagia Sophia Church is no longer a mosque, it's a museum. It's not a functioning mosque, it's a museum. And I've got to go see it one day. I've got to go to, before I quit traveling, and my goodness, I hope this stupid coronavirus gets over with. But anyway, by the end of the 15th century, though, the Muslims threatened to take over Central Europe. By the end of the 15th century, everyone was afraid of the Muslims, and with good reason. The Muslims, under Suleiman the Magnificent, got to the gates of Vienna on 2 occasions before being thrown back in the 16th century. The Eastern Mediterranean Sea became a Muslim lake because the Ottoman Navy controlled all the Eastern Mediterranean until the Battle of Lepanto, which is on somebody's test. The Battle of Lepanto, the Spanish, how do you remember the Battle of Lepanto? The Spanish beat the pants off the Muslims at the Battle of Lepanto and broke the power of Muslim control of the eastern half of the Mediterranean. Roman numeral 25. Okay. Although this is getting into the subject of our next unit, which is the Reformation, let us begin discussing the end of the Age of Faith and the beginnings of the Protestant Reformation. Remember that for several centuries, most people, it was considered unthinkable to be outside the goodwill of the Roman Catholic Church. Most people believed that the Roman Catholic Church held the keys to heaven, which was a powerful, powerful leverage. Because, if you believe that the only way you're going to get to heaven is to go through these guys, you do what they say. But anyway, thereby giving the church great authority to command the actions and the treasures of people all across Europe. At one time, however, the church owned 1/3 of all properties of Europe. However, several elements scandalized that confidence people had in the church. Failure of the Crusades. Yeah, the Crusades had been, tremendously expensive and were, backfired. And it was the church's idea, therefore, whose fault was it? The Black Plague. Black Plague killed from 50% to 2/3 of the population of Europe. And people said to the church, what do we do about it? And the church couldn't come up with any good ideas. Finally, there was corruption within the Roman Catholic Church. The church was breaking the very laws they were supposed to enforce. And so, yeah. And then there was the Great Schism, which we've already talked about. 2 popes, not 1. And the Babylonian captivity, in which the Pope had been kidnapped and taken off. In other words, all these things just made the church look bad. And, it's kind of hard to trust an entity that is corrupt, that you can't believe. And so why should we give them so much money and power and authority? Heresy, heresy, heresy. It's teaching something that is contrary to the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church, the punishment for which was being burned at the stake. Okay, Roman numeral 26. 2 new movements questioned the Roman Catholic practice of the 15th century. Lollardy, which came from John Wycliffe of England, manifested several ideas, but really wasn't a united movement. In other words, this was a movement, sorry for scratching in front of you and getting in your face. This was a movement that, people who were just against the church or not against the church, but who questioned church were as a group called Lollards. They all disagreed, but were for different things. Not all Lollards had the same beliefs. Some were anti-Trinitarians, which means that they didn't believe in 3 entities as one God. Anti-Trinitarians. Some looked to the Bible and not to the Roman Catholic Church for the sole voice of Christianity. And some were against celibacy of the priesthood. Some were against having to offer confessions to the priest. And others disagreed with, there's that word again, transubstantiation, a word that you had no idea what it was at the beginning of this course. Now you know that transubstantiation means the idea that ingesting the fruit or the wine and the communion wafer, the host, is like drinking the blood and eating the flesh of Christ. Transubstantiation. Many people disagreed with that. John Wycliffe and his followers were expelled from the church for their criticism of the Roman Catholic Church. Hasidism was a movement that followed the teachings of the Chancellor of the University of Prague, Jan Hus. Hus did the same thing Martin Luther did. We'll talk about him later. Hus did the same thing, but Hus got burned at the stake. He criticized the Roman Catholic Church for his wealth and worldliness, but because there was no printing press when he did this 100 years before Martin Luther, he had no support, and so Hus was summoned before the Council of Constance, condemned as heretic, and burned at the stake. Part D. The Council of Constance of Germany tried to enforce the decrees of reform upon the Roman Catholic Church. So this council got to where it was feeling too big for its britches. And so the Council of Constance, the council decreed that all Christians, even the Pope, was subject to the findings of this council. Of course, the Pope was like, no. The Pope issued the papal bull, Execrabilis, yes. And we all know that a papal bull is a direct order from the Pope. We know that because it's going to be on a test in the near future. Pope Pius issued a papal bull called Execrabilis, which condemned as heretical any council that tried to overrule the authority of the papacy. And so the Pope said, no, we ain't listening to any council. We are the rulers. So while the papacy had for now reestablished its control over its own church, much of the prestige of the Roman Catholic Church had been lost, as well as its strong influence over national governments. Roman numeral 27. The Renaissance papacy is a reference that covers the popes from the Great Schism, 1417, Martin Luther's 95 Theses, 1517. Popes like Julius II and Alexander VI. Julius II, of course, commissioned the painting of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. That's not why he's considered one of these bad popes. He's considered it because he was a jerk. Alexander VI, father to his own grandchild, that kind of thing, nepotism, that kind of thing, set a new low in papal standards of behavior. Aside from having Michelangelo paint the Sistine Chapel and smacking him one time, Julius II is known as the warrior pope for obvious reasons. Pope Julius II also commissioned the destruction of Constantine's Basilica of St. Peter and initiated the construction of the current St. Peter's Basilica, which, you know, if you've been paying any attention to the news over the weekend, they showed several pictures of the Pope, Pope Francis, having Mass with about 20 people in attendance in St. Peter's Basilica. It is a scene that was surreal, but you also got to see that what a beautiful and huge place that was. Michelangelo also sculpted Moses to go on the tomb of Julius II. Pope Sixtus introduced what is nepotism, which is hiring of relatives. It comes from the fact that he hired his nephew, and Pope Alexander VI, I mean, you know, he had sex with his daughter and had children, and actually would use his daughter to influence other men. Pope Leo X, who excommunicated Martin Luther, completed construction of St. Peter's Basilica using indulgences, or rather the sale of indulgences. And that's the thing that probably set off the Protestant Reformation. I wish I was standing in front of you and you could ask questions. Now, this test tomorrow will be it's a review test of the first semester. It'll have questions about the French Revolution, for example. It'll have questions about the Enlightenment, for example. We're going to see how we're going to do on it. And, if we miss a lot of the same questions, we're going to have those questions again. If you take this test tomorrow and you say, oh, no, I don't know some things, then don't leave those things, go and research those things. Hit me with questions, because we need to get ready for this AP exam. And so, yeah, test tomorrow, which is a review test. It's 100 points. Each question is 1 point. There's a matching section, and there is a big multiple choice and true false section. And that's tomorrow. Hopefully you've finished or done your 10-minute writing assignment. And now I'm going to leave you. And I will come back tomorrow, and we're going to start talking about the Protestant Reformation. Yes, we are. Martin Luther, here we come. Goodbye, guys.